Even though I bake almost daily, when I'm in Paris there are a few sweets I go straight to the supermarket to buy. One of those, Fossier's Biscuits Roses pink sugar-topped cookies, is a classic that's been made in France's Champagne region since the 17th century. The cookies, once meant to dip in champagne, which wasn't dry then, and now often served as a snack with coffee and tea, are sweet but not exceedingly so, and only lightly flavored with vanilla. They are pink like bubble gum, they're tinted with carmine, a red food coloring, and shaped like rectangles. They're baked in special molds. But their most distinctive characteristic is their extreme crispness. No matter how dainty you aim to be, each bite produces crumbs, a small flurry of powdered sugar, and a crackle that can be heard across the table. I'm rarely tempted to make something at home when perfect versions are so easy to come by. Yet on the plane to Paris recently, I saw what seemed like a doable recipe for Biscuits Roses, and that afternoon I started on it, excited to try my hand at something new and fanciful. Early in the process, I decided to give up on the shape. I loved that the rectangular form was part of the tradition, but because I wasn't ready to buy a pan with only one purpose, I let it go. I sometimes passed on the color, which is charming but not essential. What I wanted to capture was the texture, and it eluded me over 5 days and many batches. I knew what gave the Fossier cookies their snap. It was printed on the package, ammonium carbonate, also known as smelling salts. A small amount produces an airy, brittle crumb that's hard to duplicate otherwise. Relied on as a leavener, it also acts as a preservative, because it has a dehydrating effect. I found some French recipes often tell you to ask a pharmacist for it. Mine came from a specialty shop, but I couldn't bear the smell even though it dissipates in baking. Just opening the box was more than I could manage. And so I threw it away and decided instead to depend on technique and the recipe's simple ingredients: eggs, sugar, flour, cornstarch, leavening, vanilla and powdered sugar for the top. I tried whipping the whites, then beating in the yolks. I tried whipping the yolks, then beating in the whites. I fiddled with the proportions of baking powder and baking soda, of flour and cornstarch. No matter what I did, what I turned out were like lovely lady fingers, more cake than cookie. Finally I packed up my notebook, cookies from my last batch and samples of the real thing, and went to see Guillaume Portier, a pastry instructor at La Cuisine Paris. When I handed him the Fossier cookie, he smiled and said, "I know it by heart." Portier's maternal grandmother used to set out those Biscuits Roses for him with hot chocolate. When I handed him mine, he commended the flavor and commiserated on the missing crunch. His advice: make them drier. We went through each step of the recipe and considered how to build in more structure. Portier reminded me that the word biscuit, like biscotti in Italian, means twice baked. Aha! I knew that, but somehow, in my state of obsession, I'd forgotten. I returned home, the notes from our meeting scribbled over and around my recipe, and made the cookies again. Everything we'd talked about made such fine sense that I knew this batch would be good. I dried the whites and yolks by whipping each of them with sugar. I mixed the whites, yolks, and flour together very gently so that I could keep the air I created during whipping. I dusted the cookies with powdered sugar, a drying agent of sorts, and then dusted them again a few minutes later, and I baked the cookies twice, once with the heat on and then with the heat off, allowing the oven's residual warmth to crisp them. In the midst of working, I realized that this recipe is a perfect lesson for an aspiring baker. By the time the cookies go into the oven, you've whipped whites to meringue and yolks until pale, folded in ingredients, and shaped batter with a piping bag. More important, the cookies themselves at last elegant, seductive, and definitively crunchy were a lesson in misplaced expectations. I knew they weren't the same as the biscuits from Champagne, but they were satisfying by every measure, good cookies on their own merits. As I dipped another into a cup of Earl Grey, I thought of the last thing Portier said to me. It was about chasing after sweets made to be stored a long time. That's not what we bakers want, he said. Having desserts that last robs us of the pleasure we get from making pastry again and again. I hadn't considered my recent time at the oven in quite that way, but I knew he was right. I was pleased that I'd mastered the recipe, delighted with my new cookies and very glad that the last one was gone. In minutes, I'd have the pleasure of making them again. Recipe, biscuits roses.